Looks like we got ourselves a couple of troublemakers who don't know what county they're in. Several police cruisers, lights screaming, officers with hands on holsters, all descending on two men who had been pumping gas 60 seconds earlier. Sheriff Denver Peters stepped out unhurried, surveying the scene like a man admiring something he built. Larius and Darius Clover lay face down on the hot Georgia asphalt, wrists cuffed behind their backs. Darius's jaw was locked tight as stone, while Larius stared silently at the pavement. What Denver Peters didn't know was that the two men beneath him were about to dismantle everything he had spent 22 years building. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The highway stretched out ahead like a long exhale. Larius Clover had his hands at 10 and 2, the way he always drove. Steady, deliberate, eyes moving between the road and the mirrors out of habit, he couldn't shake even on a Tuesday afternoon in Georgia, with nothing but pine trees on either side. The black SUV hummed along at exactly the speed limit. No reason to rush. They were almost there. "You think she knows?" Darius asked. Larius kept his eyes on the road. "She doesn't know. She always knows. Not this time." Darius leaned back against the headrest and smiled at the roof of the car. He was Larius's mirror. Same broad shoulders, same close-cut hair, same dark eyes that missed nothing. People had been mixing them up their entire lives. Their mother never did. Not once. "She's gonna cry," Darius said. "She's not gonna cry. She's absolutely gonna cry." Larius let one corner of his mouth lift. "Yeah, she's gonna cry." Both men were 38 years old. Both were freshly discharged after their final deployment. 16 years in the United States Navy, most of it spent in places that didn't appear on any public map, doing things that would never appear in any public record. They had come home in pieces before, a week here, 10 days there, always with a return date hanging over everything like a cloud. This time was different. This time, there was no return date. Their duffel bags were in the back seat. That was all they owned that mattered. They were going home to surprise their mother, Ruth Clover, on her 70th birthday. The plan was simple. Show up at the door. Watch her face. Eat whatever she cooked. Stay. Darius had been talking about Ruth's scratch-made chocolate cake for the last 60 miles, the kind she made every year with the dark cocoa, and the too sweet frosting that both of them would eat 3 pieces of without apology. Larius had been listening, watching the exit signs tick past, feeling something in his chest slowly unknot for the first time in longer than he could remember. The war was over. Not the world's war. That would keep going, without them. Their war. Their part of it. Done. The gas station appeared on the right side of the road just before the Beaumont County line. A low concrete building with 2 pump islands and a hand-painted sign that had been faded since the 80s. Larius recognized it without thinking. He and Darius used to ride their bikes here for cold drinks on summer afternoons while their mother graded papers at the kitchen table. Mr. Eugene Hickers had worked that counter since before either of them was born. He'd always slid them an extra piece of candy without saying a word about it. "We need gas," Larius said, already signaling. "And a water," Darius added. Larius pulled in and parked at the nearest pump. They both climbed out, moving slow and easy. No agenda, no rush. 2 men in plain jeans and T-shirts on a warm afternoon with nowhere urgent to be. Larius unscrewed the gas cap. Darius stretched his arms above his head and rolled his neck. Across the 2-lane road, a Beaumont County Sheriff's cruiser sat in the shade of a pecan tree, angled toward the station. Deputy Carl Mencher was behind the wheel with a fast food bag open on his lap. He had been watching them pull in from the moment they turned off the highway. His eyes moved over the SUV, black, clean, out-of-county plates, and then over the two men at the pump. He set down his food. He ran the plates. The result came back clean. Completely. Entirely. Unremarkably clean. Mencher stared at the screen. Then he looked back across the road at Larius and Darius. His jaw moved slowly. He reached for his radio and called it in. 2 large black males, he said, acting suspiciously at the Hickers station on Route 9. He said it with the flat, practiced confidence of a man who had made calls like this before, of a man who had never once been told that it was wrong. He picked his food back up. Across the road, Larius finished setting the pump and leaned against the side of the SUV, watching the last of the Georgia afternoon light cut gold through the pines. Darius was heading toward the station door, about to wave at Mr. Hickers through the glass. Neither of them heard the radio crackle. Neither of them heard the voice that came back. Neither of them knew yet that in 6 minutes this quiet gas station, this place from their childhood, this last stop before home, was about to become something else entirely. Darius pushed through the station door, and the little bell above it rang the same way it had 30 years ago. Mr. Eugene Hickers looked up from behind the counter. A small man in his 70s, with a white mustache and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His whole face changed when he recognized who he was looking at. "Lord have mercy," he said. "The Clover boys." Darius grinned. "Hey, Mr. Hickers. Your mama know you're back?" "Not yet. It's a surprise." Hickers shook his head slowly, smiling like a man remembering something good. "She's gonna lose her mind." Outside, Larius was still leaning against the SUV, watching the pump numbers climb. The afternoon was quiet. A mockingbird was making noise somewhere in the tree line. A minivan pulled in at the far pump, a woman with 2 kids climbing out. Ordinary Tuesday. Ordinary life. Then he heard the first siren. Distant, but moving fast. He straightened up. The second one hit before the first one faded. Then a third, coming from different directions. North, south. The county road cutting in from the east. Larius turned slowly in a full circle, watching the tree lines. His body knew what his mind was still processing, the same way it had known things in places far worse than this. The first cruiser came in hard, tires biting the gravel lot, light bar screaming red and blue. Then another behind it. Then 2 more from the opposite entrance. They came in fast, and they came in organized, sealing both exits before Larius could take 3 steps in any direction. The minivan woman grabbed her kids and ran. Darius appeared in the station doorway and stopped dead. They kept coming. County units, state troopers, more county. Pulling up tight, door to door, until the gas station was ringed in black and white. Larius counted without meaning to. The way he'd counted threats in other places, in other languages, in the dark. He stopped at 30. 30 vehicles, for 2 men at a gas pump. The last cruiser pulled in slow and easy, like it had all the time in the world. Sheriff Denver Peters stepped out. He was thick through the shoulders, late 50s, with a gray mustache and small, flat eyes that took everything in and gave nothing back. He didn't rush. He adjusted his hat. He surveyed the scene the way a man surveys something he built. Then he looked at Larius and Darius Clover like they were exactly where he expected them to be. "Hands where I can see them!" The shout came from 3 directions at once, weapons up. A dozen barrels pointed at 2 men who hadn't moved. Larius raised his hands first. Slow, deliberate. Every movement communicated exactly one thing. I am not a threat. It was the same posture he'd used in hostile territory overseas, except this was Georgia, and the men pointing guns at him wore American badges. "On the ground!" Mencher's voice, sharp and eager. "Both of you!" On the ground! Now! They went down. Knees first, then hands, then flat, controlled, practiced, together. The asphalt was hot through Larius's shirt. He heard boots moving toward them from multiple directions. Peters walked over without hurrying. He stood above them both, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Well," he said, like they were mildly interesting. Like this was nothing at all. Deputies moved in. Cuffs came out. Larius felt the cold metal close around his wrists and locked every muscle in his body down. Not against the restraint, but against what he wanted to do about it. 16 years of discipline. This was just another test. This was just another moment to survive. Peters began his speech, voice raised enough for every deputy to hear. He talked about descriptions. He talked about public safety. He talked about 2 individuals matching reports of armed suspects in Beaumont County, and the importance of following proper procedure. It was practiced. He'd done this before. Every word was for his audience, not for the 2 men on the ground. Mencher stood back with his arms crossed, watching. Mr. Hickers stood frozen behind the station window, one hand pressed to the glass. Larius turned his head on the asphalt and found Darius 3 feet away, cheek to the ground, eyes forward. Darius's jaw was so tight it looked like stone. His whole body was coiled, not with fear, with the effort of not moving. Larius held his gaze. He gave him the smallest nod. Barely anything. A millimeter. Not yet. Darius blinked once. Understood. Held still. Above them, Peters kept talking. Comfortable. Certain. Like a man who had never once paid a price for anything. Peters crouched down. He brought himself to eye level with Larius, close enough that Larius could smell the coffee on his breath. His voice dropped, losing the performance, becoming something quieter and more deliberate. You 2 match the description of a pair of armed robbery suspects last seen in Beaumont County this morning, he said. So right now, you're going to stay exactly where you are, and you're going to let my deputies do their job. You understand me? Larius looked at him steadily. I understand you, he said. Now I need you to understand me. Peters's eyes narrowed just slightly. My name is Petty Officer First Class Larius Clover, United States Navy, SEAL Team 6. Larius kept his voice flat and clear. No anger, no emotion, just facts delivered the way he'd delivered coordinates in the field. The man beside me is Petty Officer First Class Darius Clover. Same unit. Our commanding officer is Rear Admiral James Warford. He is stationed at the Pentagon. He paused 1 beat. I strongly recommend you call him before this goes any further, Sheriff. Peters stared at him for a long moment. Then he stood up slowly and looked at Mencher. Get their wallets. Mencher crouched and pulled both wallets from their back pockets. He flipped the first one open, dug past the cash, and found the military ID. He read it. His expression shifted, something moving behind his eyes that he couldn't quite hide. He opened the second wallet. Read that one too. He stood and walked to Peters without a word and handed them over. Peters took both IDs and looked at them. One, then the other. His face didn't break, not exactly, but something behind it went very still. The kind of still that comes right before a man starts recalculating everything. He said nothing. At the Pentagon, the distress flag hit Rear Admiral James Warford's screen at 2:47 p.m. He was at his desk, sleeves rolled to the elbows, when the alert came through. 2 registered devices, simultaneous horizontal impact, Beaumont County, Georgia. He knew exactly whose devices they were. He had signed their discharge papers himself 3 weeks ago. He picked up his desk phone and called Captain Alexander Hollison first. 2 words. Clover Brothers. She was already pulling it up on her end. Then he dialed Darius's number. It rang 4 times. Then someone answered, but said nothing. Warford had spent 30 years reading silences. This one told him everything. The ambient sound was wrong. Too many engines, too many radios in the background. And the breathing on the other end was not Darius Clover. "This is Rear Admiral James Warford," he said calmly. "Who am I speaking with?" A pause. Then, "Sheriff Denver Peters, Beaumont County." Warford set down his pen. He pulled the second phone on his desk toward him, without rushing, and dialed the governor's direct line with one hand while keeping Peters on the other. "Sheriff Peters," he said, "I need you to listen carefully." Back at the gas station, Peters was still holding Darius's phone. Every deputy in the lot was watching him now, waiting to see what he did next. He turned the phone over once in his hand. Then he held it down between the 2 cuffed men on the ground and put it on speaker. The voice that came through was not loud. That was the first thing. It didn't need to be. "Sheriff Peters." Rear Admiral Warford spoke with the measured calm of a man who had commanded operations in active war zones and found this, by comparison, extremely straightforward. "I am the commanding officer of both men you currently have in restraints. I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once." Nobody in the lot moved. Both of my petty officers are equipped with Pentagon-registered devices. When those devices registered a horizontal impact simultaneously, an automatic distress flag was triggered in our system. I have been on the phone with the Judge Advocate General's office for the past 4 minutes. A brief pause. "What you have done today constitutes violations of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. It also triggers federal jurisdiction under protections extended to active and recently discharged military personnel. I have the governor's direct line open on another phone right now." Peters's face had gone the color of old concrete. "You have 10 minutes to remove those restraints and clear your units from that location. After 10 minutes, I make the call. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Sheriff?" The line stayed open, waiting. Peters looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at the 30 units surrounding a gas station. He looked at Darius Clover, still lying cuffed on the asphalt, watching him with eyes that held no fear whatsoever. "Yes," Peters said. Barely a word. More like air escaping. What happened next took less than 10 minutes. Units pulled out one by one, lights off, in silence. No announcements, no explanations. Deputies wouldn't look at each other. Mencher got in his cruiser and left without a word. A deputy uncuffed Darius first, then Darius. Peters stood several feet back, hat in his hand, eyes on the middle distance. "You're free to go," he said. Darius stood, rolled his wrists once, looked at Peters for exactly 1 second, not with hatred, not with satisfaction, just with the clear, level gaze of a man filing something away permanently. Behind the station window, Mr. Eugene Hickers had both palms pressed flat to the glass. His shoulders were shaking. He was weeping like a man who had waited a very long time to see something like this. Darius pulled the SUV out of the lot and onto the road. Neither of them spoke. The gas station shrank in the rearview mirror and then disappeared behind a curve in the trees. Darius kept both hands on the wheel. The pump numbers were still running on his receipt, folded in the cup holder. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes ago. Same highway, same pine trees, same gold afternoon light cutting through the windshield. Nothing was the same. They drove 2 miles in complete silence. Then Darius exhaled. Long, slow, the way a man breathes out after holding it underwater. "Okay," he said. "Just that." "Okay," Darius said back. That was all either of them needed. They had done this before, come back from something that had no clean language around it, and agreed, wordlessly, to put it in a box for later. The box never disappeared. You just carried it to the next thing. The next thing was 3 miles down the road. Ruth Clover's house sat on a half-acre lot at the end of Sycamore Street. A white clapboard house with a green front door and flower boxes under every window that she replanted every spring without fail. The oak tree in the front yard was the same one Larios had fallen out of at age 9. The porch swing was new, third one since childhood, same spot. The driveway had a crack running down the middle that neither brother had ever gotten around to fixing. Larios turned onto Sycamore and felt something shift in his chest. Not a dramatic thing, just a quiet, cellular recognition. Home. He hadn't gotten the SUV fully stopped before the green door flew open. Ruth Clover came through that screen door the way she did everything, completely, without hesitation. She was a small woman, 70 years old that very day. With silver hair she kept natural and close cut, and hands that had spent 35 years holding chalk and grading papers and raising 2 boys alone. She hit the porch steps, still pulling her cardigan closed, and she was already saying their names before she reached the bottom. Larios! Darius! Her voice broke in the middle of Darius's name. Both brothers were out of the car and moving before she made it to the driveway. She grabbed Larios first, one arm around his neck, pulling his head down to her level. And then Darius folded in from the other side, and she had both of them at once, this small woman holding her 2 giant sons in the front yard on her birthday, squeezing with everything she had. "Mama," Darius said into her shoulder. His voice was different from any voice he'd used all day. She couldn't speak for a moment, just held on. Larios closed his eyes. The box could wait. Ruth made smothered chicken and rice because it was her birthday, and she cooked what she wanted on her birthday. She made cornbread from scratch. She made her chocolate cake, dark cocoa, too sweet frosting, and set it on the counter like a centerpiece while she cooked, glancing at it every few minutes with quiet satisfaction. They ate at the kitchen table the way they always had. Ruth closest to the stove, Larios across from Darius. The overhead light a little too bright, and nobody caring. Darius ate 2 full plates and started working on a third, which made Ruth beam. She asked about the discharge, about what came next, about whether they'd thought about where they were going to live. "Here, for now," Larios said. Ruth looked at him over her fork. "For how long?" "For as long as you'll have us." She turned back to her plate to hide her expression, but not before both brothers saw it. Darius made her laugh 3 times at dinner. Real laughing, the kind that made her put her fork down and press her hand to her side. Old stories, mostly. Incidents from childhood that had not been funny at the time. Larios watched the 2 of them across the table and felt the loosening continue. Something that had been pulled tight for a very long time, slowly releasing. By 9 o'clock, Ruth was fading. She kissed them both on the cheek at the kitchen doorway, told Darius he still ate too much, and went to bed. The brothers cleaned up quietly. Dishes, leftovers, wiped the counter down, moving around each other in the small kitchen the same way they'd moved in much tighter spaces. They settled into the living room. Darius took the armchair. Larios took the couch. The television came on low. Just background. Just noise. The local Beaumont news theme played. Larios reached for the remote. His hand found it. His thumb found the off button. He didn't press it. He slowly set the remote back down on the cushion beside him and watched the screen. The anchor was a man Larios didn't recognize. Young, neat hair, practiced expression of mild concern. Beaumont County Sheriff's Department responded to a call this afternoon at approximately 2:45 p.m., he read, resulting in the brief detainment of 2 individuals at a Route 9 gas station outside Beaumont city limits. According to a statement from Sheriff Denver Peters, the situation was handled professionally and lawfully, and both individuals were released without incident. The footage behind him showed the gas station from a distance. Cruisers, lights, the wide shot of a contained scene. You couldn't see the asphalt. You couldn't see two men face down in cuffs. You couldn't see 30 units surrounding a gas pump over nothing. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Two men detained after confrontation with law enforcement." Darius's hands curled slowly in his lap. The word confrontation sat in the middle of the living room like something with weight. Larius stared at it on the screen. No mention of Navy SEALs. No mention of military IDs. No mention of Rear Admiral James Warford reading federal statutes over a speakerphone while 30 deputies stood in a parking lot, saying nothing. Just confrontation. Like it had come from both sides equally. Those lying. Darius stopped himself. His jaw locked. A sound came from the hallway. Ruth stood in the doorway in her robe and slippers, hand pressed flat against the doorframe. She had heard the television from her room and come to see. Now she stood very still, looking at the screen the way someone looks at something they have seen before, not with shock, but with a tired, bone-deep recognition. She crossed the room and sat on the couch between her sons, without being asked. She looked at the anchor. She looked at the chyron. She put her hand over her mouth and held it there. Larius watched her face and understood exactly what she was feeling, because he had watched her feel it his entire childhood. Every time a story got told wrong in this county, every time a man like Peters stood in front of a camera and rearranged what had actually happened into something more convenient. She had been watching this her entire life. The anchor moved on to a weather segment. Darius picked up the remote and turned the television off. The room went quiet. Then Larius's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Hollison, A. Jag. He answered immediately and put it on speaker. Captain. His voice was even. Larius. Captain Alexander Hollison did not waste words. She was mid-40s, sharp as a straight edge, and she had clearly been working since the distress flag hit the Pentagon. I need you to hear this clearly. Peters filed a formal incident report 30 minutes after Admiral Warford's call. He's claiming you and Darius were verbally aggressive toward his deputies, that you refused initial instructions, and that the detainment was a lawful response to credible threat indicators. Darius made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He's trying to get his version on record first, Hollison continued. He knows the military report exists. He's trying to build a wall around it before anyone can use it. The statement, "The news just ran," came directly from his office. He called them before the lot was even clear. Larius absorbed that. Peters had been composing his counterstory while his deputies were still pulling out of the parking lot, while Mr. Hickers was still crying at his window. "What are our options?" Larius asked. "You have options, but the window is not wide open, and it won't stay open. I need you both strategic and patient, which I know is harder than it sounds right now." Hollison paused. "I'm already in contact with Admiral Warford. There's a path here, a real one. But you have to trust the process and not get ahead of it." "We understand," Larius said. After the call ended, nobody spoke for a moment. The house was quiet around them. Ruth's birthday cake still on the kitchen counter, the dishes clean and drying, the porch swing outside moving slightly in the night air. "They're going to bury this," Larius said. Not with panic, just with the flat clarity of a man naming what he sees. Ruth turned and looked at her son, 70 years old, 35 years in a Beaumont County classroom, watching men like Peters walk through the world untouched. She took Larius's hand in her right and Darius's hand in her left, and she held both of them firmly. She did not flinch. "Not this time," she said. Ruth made coffee before either of her sons came downstairs. By the time Larius and Darius settled at the kitchen table, there were 2 mugs waiting and a plate of toast neither of them had asked for. Ruth didn't join them. She moved quietly to the other side of the kitchen, wiping down a counter that was already clean, staying close without being in the way. She had always known when to be present and when to give space. 35 years of teaching other people's children had sharpened what motherhood had already built. Larius set his phone flat on the table at 8 o'clock exactly and opened the video call. Captain Alexander Hollison appeared on the screen, sitting straight in uniform, her office behind her already busy with morning light and stacked files. She looked like a woman who had been awake for hours and didn't consider that remarkable. Her face was composed and precise, the kind of face that had been trained to show you only what it chose to show you. "Good morning," she said. "Let's get to it." She didn't ease into it. That was not her way. "Peters is not operating alone," she said. "He never has been. His political cover comes from Senator Harold Belvin III. And before you ask, yes, the county is named for his family. His grandfather built this district. His father held this Senate seat before him. Harold III has been in office for 22 years, and in that time he has personally intervened to shut down 3 separate federal investigations into Peters's department. She let that land. 3. Over 10 years. Each one died quietly in committee, with no public explanation." Darius leaned back in his chair slowly. "So, Peters knows he's protected." "Peters has always known he's protected," Hollison said. "That's why he's been doing this for 20 years without consequence. That's what we're actually up against. Not one reckless sheriff, but a system that has been deliberately maintained." She looked at both of them through the screen. "Standard military channels will not move fast enough. Belvin has friends in those channels too. We need to build something he can't reach." "What does that look like?" Larius asked. 2 tracks running at the same time. First, evidence. Physical, documented, irrefutable. The kind that exists before anyone can touch it. She pulled a notepad closer. "That gas station has security cameras. I need that footage secured today, not tomorrow. Before Peters or anyone connected to him has the opportunity to make a phone call to the right person and have it disappear." Larius was already reaching for his phone. Hollison continued. "The second track is public exposure, but it has to be done carefully and on our timeline. Not reactive, not emotional. Surgical." She looked at Darius specifically. "I know what you want to do. I'm asking you to do the harder thing." Darius held her gaze. "I'm listening." Larius stepped away from the table and dialed Mr. Hickers from memory. The number hadn't changed in 30 years. It rang twice before the old man picked up, his voice low and careful, like he'd been waiting for someone to call. "Mr. Hickers," Larius said, "the cameras yesterday, were they running?" A pause. "Running the whole time, son. Got everything from the minute you pulled in." "Has anyone come by? Anyone ask you about the footage?" "Not yet." Another pause. "But it's early. Don't let anyone touch it. Don't let anyone in that back room." "Can you do that?" The old man's voice came back steadier than Larius expected. "I've been waiting 50 years to do something that mattered," he said quietly. "I can hold a door." Larius returned to the table. "Footage is intact. He'll hold it." Hollison was already typing. "I'm filing a formal legal preservation hold right now. That footage becomes protected evidence under federal record-keeping statutes the moment this goes through. Any tampering after that point is a separate federal offense." She looked up. "It also means no one in Beaumont County can claim they didn't know." "Good," Larios said. The call ran another 20 minutes. Logistics, timelines, what to say if local media called, what not to say under any circumstances. Hollison, was thorough. She left no edges loose. When it ended, Larius closed the phone and wrote 3 words on the notepad Ruth kept by the phone cradle. Footage. Foundation. Hold. Darius hadn't moved from his chair. He was looking out the kitchen window at the familiar street outside. Sycamore, lined with the same oaks that had been there their whole lives. Beaumont County, Georgia. The place that had shaped them and scarred them and sent them into the Navy, and was now trying, one more time, to rewrite what had happened to them on its own terms. He looked at the street for a long time. "They think we're going to go away," he said. Larius capped the pen. "Then let's make sure they find out different." 2 days passed quietly. Hollison had been explicit about that. 2 days minimum before any public statement. Long enough for the legal preservation hold on the gas station footage to process fully through federal channels. Long enough for Peters to believe they were going away. Larius and Darius stayed close to Ruth's house, took their mother's calls from church friends who had already heard fragments of the story through people's tight network of whispers, and said nothing to anyone beyond, "We're handling it." On Thursday morning, they sat at the kitchen table again, same chairs, same coffee, and joined a 3-way secure call with Hollison and a Pentagon media liaison named Officer Tara Webler, who spoke in clean, precise sentences and had clearly done this before. The statement took 40 minutes to finalize. Every word was chosen the way you choose weight-bearing material for a structure. Nothing decorative, nothing weak. When it was done, Hollison read it back in full. 2 decorated United States Navy SEALs, Petty Officer First Class Larius Clover and Petty Officer First Class Darius Clover, were unlawfully detained at gunpoint by 30 Beaumont County law enforcement units on Tuesday afternoon while stopped at a gas station. Both men were handcuffed on the ground without cause. They were released only after their commanding officer, Rear Admiral James Warford, intervened directly and cited specific federal statute violations. A formal military incident report has been filed. All evidence, including security footage, has been preserved under federal legal hold. Factual, surgical, undeniable. Webler released it simultaneously to 3 journalists, each one a national reporter with a documented record of covering law enforcement misconduct. No local outlets. No Beaumont County press. Nothing that passed through any channel Senator Belvin's office monitored. By noon, the story was running nationally. By 2 o'clock, it had broken through to social media with a force that moved like water through a cracked dam. Fast, in every direction at once, impossible to contain. Veterans organizations posted formal statements within the hour. A retired SEAL commander went on record calling it a disgrace to every uniform in that parking lot. The hashtag #SealsOnTheGround was trending before dinner. Larius's phone became unusable. Darius turned his off entirely and slid it across the kitchen table to Ruth, who set it face down next to the fruit bowl and made sandwiches. Hollison called at 4 o'clock. 2 interviews, she said. I've selected the journalists. Both are national, both are credible, and both already have the military incident report in hand. You don't explain. You don't justify. You state facts, and you let the facts do the work. Can you do that? Yes, both brothers said at the same time. The interviews were filmed in Ruth's living room, the brothers sitting side by side on the couch in civilian clothes. No uniforms, no medals. Hollison had been clear on that point. The story is who you are, not what you wear. Larius spoke in the same measured cadence he had used on the asphalt. Direct, unhurried, factually immovable. Darius chose every word like he was disarming something. Neither man raised his voice. Neither man had to. The footage did what footage does. Watching 2 calm, decorated veterans describe being forced to the ground at a Georgia gas station with quiet, unshakable clarity, hit harder than any raised voice could have. Ruth watched both interviews from her armchair, back straight, hands folded in her lap. When the second one ended, she stayed very still for a moment, looking at the screen. Then she simply nodded once. A small private gesture, like something she had been holding for a long time, had finally been set down somewhere solid. By Friday, the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department switchboard was overwhelmed. By Saturday, 3 national veterans advocacy organizations had formally requested a federal response. Senator Harold Belvin III's office released a 2-line statement declining to comment on an active law enforcement matter and had not responded to 12 follow-up calls. Inside the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department, a television on the wall of Peters's office played the national coverage on mute. His door was closed. Mencher sat at his desk in the outer office and watched the silent screen and said nothing to anyone for the better part of an afternoon. Peters did not come out of his office until 6 o'clock. When he did, his face showed nothing. He took his hat from the hook by the door, put it on, and walked out to his cruiser without speaking to a single deputy. He had the look of a man who had just decided something. The week after the interviews felt like momentum. Hollison had calls with 2 congressional offices. Admiral Warford submitted a formal letter to the Department of Justice flagging Peters's department for review. The gas station footage, clear, time-stamped, showing exactly 2 men calmly pumping gas before being surrounded, had been reviewed by 3 federal attorneys and described by all of them using the same word: damning. Larius and Darius stayed at Ruth's house and let Hollison work. They fixed the crack in the driveway. They repainted the porch railing. They ate dinner with their mother every night and let the story move without them for a while. It felt, cautiously, like the right direction. Then the 11th day arrived. Hollison called at 7 in the morning, which meant she had been awake since at least 5. "Listen to me carefully before you react," she said. That was never a good opening. A document had surfaced overnight on a right-wing media outlet with national reach, a site known for publishing damaging stories about people who inconvenienced powerful interests, always just vague enough to avoid direct legal liability. The document alleged that Darius Clover had a disciplinary incident during his Navy service. It was thin. No dates, no specifics, no named sources. Just the shape of an accusation, carefully assembled to look like evidence without actually being any. The outlet had published it without a single attempt at verification. "It's fabricated," Hollison said flatly. "Darius's record is spotless. I have reviewed every page of it personally. There is nothing there." "Then why?" Darius started. "Because of when," she said. "The press conference is in 2 days, Darius. I was scheduled to present the military incident report, the footage, and formal documentation of Peters's conduct before the congressional subcommittee. This drops now because someone needed to change the subject before I could walk into that room." Larius looked across the kitchen table at his brother. Darius was sitting completely still, not tense, not loud, just still. The way very deep water is still. "Belvin?" Larius said. "It has his fingerprints all over it," Hollison said. "The outlet has published for him before. Always deniable, always useful. But I can't prove the connection yet. Not in 2 days." A pause. "I need you both to understand what this means for Thursday." It meant the press conference happened, but wrong. Larius and Darius watched it on Ruth's living room television, Hollison visible on the screen at a podium in Washington, composed and precise in her dress uniform. She had prepared to spend 45 minutes walking a congressional subcommittee through documented evidence of federal civil rights violations in Beaumont County, Georgia. Instead, she spent the first 20 minutes answering questions about the document. Is it authentic? No. Can you prove it's fabricated? We are in the process of formal verification. Has Petty Officer Darius Clover ever faced disciplinary review? Absolutely not. Then why does this document exist? That is an excellent question for the outlet that published it. The subcommittee members who had come in sharp went soft. The ones who had come in looking for an exit found one. By the time Hollison got to Peters's conduct, the room had shifted, some members checking phones, one asking if they should table further discussion pending clarification of the full record. Clarification. As if 30 units surrounding a gas station needed clarifying. The coverage that afternoon reflected exactly what the fabrication was designed to create: confusion. Two commentators on a national broadcast asked whether the brothers were using their military status as a shield. One cable host spent 11 minutes on the question of whether decorated veterans were above the law. Nobody mentioned that they had been cuffed on asphalt without cause. Darius watched it all without speaking. Not with anger. Anger would have been easier to watch. He watched it with a hollow, flattened expression that was somehow worse. When the television went off, he stood without a word and went out through the back door. Larius waited 10 minutes. Then he followed. Darius was sitting on the back porch steps in the dark, elbows on his knees, looking out at Ruth's small backyard. The garden she kept, the old oak at the fence line, the Georgia night pressing close and warm around everything. He didn't turn when Larius came out. Larius sat beside him on the step without asking. Neither of them spoke. The cicadas filled the silence. Loud, relentless, indifferent to all of it. Somewhere down Sycamore Street, a screen door banged shut. They sat there a long time. Larius and Darius were already at the table when Ruth came downstairs. She took one look at both of them, the set of their shoulders, the quiet that had a different quality than ordinary morning quiet. And she didn't ask. She went to the stove. She made eggs the way she always made eggs, with butter and a low flame and more patience than most people gave the task. She set a plate in front of each son and sat down with her own coffee and looked at them both steadily. "Tell me," she said. Larius told her about the press conference, about the fabricated document, about the coverage afterward. He kept his voice even and his words plain. Ruth listened without interrupting, which was how she had always listened. Completely, giving every word its full weight, before she responded to any of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need to tell you something about your father." Neither brother spoke. Jordan Clover had been dead for 11 years. He existed in this house in photographs, and in the particular way Ruth sometimes went quiet in the middle of a sentence. A pause so brief most people wouldn't catch it. But his sons always did. They had learned early not to pull on that thread. She would offer what she was ready to offer. That was her way. She was ready now. "Your father was stopped in Beaumont County in the summer of 1987, she said. He was 29 years old. He was driving home from a job site. He'd been doing carpentry work for a family over in Calhoun Township. Legitimate work. Good money." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "A deputy pulled him over on Route 9, not far from where you boys were this week." Larius went very still. The deputy called it in as a suspicious vehicle. Within 15 minutes, there were 8 units on the scene. She paused. 8 was a lot for 1987. They didn't have 30 yet. Darius looked at her. "What happened?" "They held him on the road for 2 hours. Then they took him in. Said they found something in his truck. Tools, Larius. His own carpentry tools. They called them potential burglary implements." Her voice didn't waver, but something behind it pulled tight. He spent 3 days in Beaumont County lockup. No formal charge was ever filed. They released him without explanation on a Thursday morning and sent him home like nothing had happened. "Did he fight it?" Darius asked. "He tried." Ruth set her mug down. "He went to 2 lawyers. One told him he didn't have a case. The other took his money and disappeared. The company he'd been working for heard about the arrest and let him go. They didn't want the trouble. It took him 8 months to find steady work again. He never fully recovered his standing in this town. She looked at the table. It broke something in him that didn't fully heal. You boys were 3 years old. You don't remember who he was before it. The kitchen was very quiet. The deputy who pulled him over, Larius said slowly. Who was he? Ruth looked up at her son. A young deputy named Carl Mencher. She let that settle. Denver Peters was his training officer. The name landed like something physical. Darius pushed back from the table slightly, as if he needed an inch more air. Peters taught him, Larius said. Peters built the whole system, Ruth said. He didn't invent it. It was there before him. But he perfected it. He learned that if you target men who are trained to comply, men with discipline and self-control, men who won't fight back in the moment, you can do anything to them and call it procedure. She looked at both her sons. That's why I pushed you toward the Navy. I needed you to have something in your hands that they couldn't take. A military ID, a rank, a commanding officer with a direct line to people they couldn't ignore. Her voice dropped slightly. I built you into something they couldn't easily destroy, because I watched them destroy your father with nothing but a radio call and 3 days in a cell. Darius looked at his mother for a long time. Why didn't you tell us? He said. His voice was rough at the edges. Ruth met his eyes without flinching. 70 years old. Steady as load-bearing stone. Because I needed you to become men, she said quietly, before you became angry ones. The morning light came through the kitchen window and lay across the table between them, across the coffee mugs and the empty plates, and the weight of everything that had just been said, and none of them moved for a long time. Ruth cleared the breakfast plates. Nobody had said much since her last words settled over the table. There wasn't much to say. Not yet. Some things needed to sit before they could be spoken about further, and all three of them understood that without discussing it. Larius washed the dishes. Darius dried them. Ruth put them away. The kitchen moved in quiet rhythm, the way it did when the Clover family was processing something too large for immediate words. They were still moving through that quiet when Hollison called at 10:30. I need you both to hear this together, she said, when Larius answered. He put her on speaker without being asked and set the phone on the cleared table. Ruth, reading the moment, came and stood in the kitchen doorway. I've spent the last 2 weeks pulling Peters's full departmental record, Hollison said. Not just incident reports, internal communications, detainment logs, case dispositions going back 8 years. I had 2 JAG paralegals working on it around the clock. A pause. What I found is not an accident. It is not a pattern of negligence. It is deliberate, repeated, and targeted. Larius pulled out a chair and sat. Darius leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. 3 men, Hollison said. 3 other black veterans stopped by Peters's department under near-identical circumstances to yours. Stopped without cause. Detained beyond any legal justification. And then, consequence. She started with Bernard Orkin. Bernard was 51 years old, a Gulf War veteran who had spent 15 years after his discharge building a small trucking business in Macon County. He drove his own rig. 2 trucks, 3 contracted routes, 11 years of clean operating history. 2 years ago, Peters's department stopped him on a rural stretch of Route 9. Solo stop, no backup called initially, but that changed fast. Within minutes, 6 units were on scene. A deputy claimed to smell something from the cab. A search produced nothing, but a deputy filed a report alleging Bernard had been verbally threatening during the stop. The report fed into a weapons charge that appeared 3 days later. built around a locked toolbox in the truck cab that Bernard had carried for 11 years without incident. The charge was dismissed at arraignment, but the damage was already done. Bernard's commercial driver's license was flagged during the investigation period. His insurance carrier dropped him. By the time the charge evaporated, 2 of his 3 contracts had moved to other carriers. He lost his business in 4 months. He's working for someone else's trucking company now, Hollison said, driving someone else's rig. Everything he built, gone. Darius's jaw tightened. Then Samuel Peaks. Samuel was 63, a Vietnam-era Army veteran, retired postal worker, deacon at his church in Beaumont's neighboring county. Peters's department stopped him 14 months ago. Again on Route 9, again without documented cause. Samuel, trained by decades of discipline not to escalate, complied completely. He was cuffed, transported, and held in Beaumont County lockup for 11 days on a disorderly conduct charge so vague it barely filled half a page. The charge was dropped at his first court appearance. The judge used the word insufficient 3 times in 4 sentences. Samuel Peaks spent 11 days in a county cell for existing on Route 9, while black and veteran, and trained to comply. And then there's Elena Westby, Hollison said. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but more deliberate. Elena was 74 years old, Vietnam veteran, 2 tours. He had lived in Beaumont County his entire life, except for those 2 years overseas. He was stopped 18 months ago. Same road, same department, same choreography. During the stop, handcuffed and on the ground in the July heat, Elena Westby went into cardiac arrest. He survived. A deputy called an ambulance, and Hollison noted carefully that it took 11 minutes to arrive. Elena spent 6 days in the hospital. His heart was permanently damaged. He lived alone now, moved slower, carried nitroglycerin tablets in his shirt pocket everywhere he went. He agreed to testify, Hollison said quietly. All 3 of them did. The kitchen was completely still. Larius looked at the phone on the table. Peters targeted veterans specifically, he said. It wasn't a question. Specifically and deliberately, Hollison confirmed. Men trained to comply. Men whose discipline made them easier to victimize and harder to believe when they pushed back. He weaponized their self-control against them. Darius stood up from the counter and walked to the kitchen window. He stood there with his back to the room, looking out at the yard, at the oak tree, at the ordinary Saturday morning continuing indifferently outside. When he turned back around, his eyes were red. "We didn't just survive a bad day," he said. His voice was rough and low and entirely controlled. "We survived what killed other men." Nobody argued with that, because it was exactly true. 3 weeks after the gas station, the Department of Justice made it official. Larius heard it first through Hollison 30 minutes before the public announcement. A formal notification that the Civil Rights Division was opening a federal investigation into the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department. When the press release hit at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, it moved through national media like a current. By noon, it was on every major network. By 2 o'clock, 40 veterans were standing outside Peters's department on Main Street with signs organized in under 3 hours through a single group message thread. Senator Harold Belvin III went completely silent. No statement. No press availability. His office phone rang continuously and was answered by an intern instructed to say nothing useful. Peters was placed on administrative review. He kept his salary. He kept his office. But the weight of 30 years of untouchable authority visibly shifted. You could see it in the footage from outside his department, in the way he walked to his car that Wednesday afternoon with his hat pulled low and his eyes on the ground, a man suddenly aware that people were watching him differently. Ruth's church gave her a standing ovation that Sunday. She stood at the end of her pew and received it with her hands folded and her back straight and her eyes bright, and she did not sit down until every person in that building had finished. Larius and Darius celebrated the only way they knew how, quietly, at the kitchen table, with coffee. They shook hands. Darius allowed himself one slow smile. Hollison let them have 24 hours. Then she called. "I need you to hear me clearly," she said, and both brothers recognized the register of her voice immediately. Not alarm, but precision. The voice she used when she needed them focused. A federal investigation being opened is not a federal investigation being completed. It is a door opening. Doors can close. "We understand," Larius said. "I'm not sure you do yet," she said. "But you will." She was right. They did. The notice arrived 3 weeks later. A Tuesday, the same day of the week as the gas station, which Larius noted and said nothing about. The Department of Justice issued a terse, bureaucratic statement. The investigation into the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department was being paused indefinitely pending resolution of jurisdictional questions and further assessment of federal nexus. Jurisdictional questions. Federal nexus. Larius read the statement 3 times. The language was so carefully constructed, so bloodlessly neutral, that if you didn't know what you were looking at, you might have believed it was procedural, routine, just the government being slow, the way governments are slow. But Hollison had taught them to read the spaces between official words. "Someone made calls," Larius said flatly when she confirmed it. "Someone made calls," Hollison agreed. "I can't prove which calls yet, but the timing is not coincidental, and the language is not accidental." A pause. "There's something else." There was always something else. Peters had filed a civil lawsuit against Larius and Darius that morning. The same morning the pause was announced, which was not a coincidence either. The complaint alleged emotional distress and reputational damage resulting from the brothers' public statements and media appearances. It sought damages and a formal retraction. Darius stared at the ceiling when Larius read it to him. "He's suing us," Darius said. "The man who had us on the ground in cuffs is suing us." "It's not about winning," Hollison said. She had anticipated this. Larius could hear it in how quickly she responded. "It's about cost. Legal proceedings take years. They take money. They take energy and attention that you can't spend fighting him on other fronts. It's a siege, not a lawsuit." "Can he win it?" Larius asked. "No," Hollison said, "but he can make it expensive to lose." That evening, after Hollison's call ended, and Ruth had gone to bed, and the house settled into its night sounds, Larius found Darius in the living room in the dark, not asleep, just sitting. He sat across from him. Neither spoke for a while. "They're going to win," Darius said finally. Not loud, not angry, just a man looking directly at something true. "They always win. That's the whole point of the system. It's built so they always win." Larius didn't argue immediately. He let the words sit. He looked at his brother. This man who had survived 16 years of the most brutal demands the Navy could invent, who had never once quit anything. And he felt something harden in his own chest, like a decision being made below the level of words. "Not this time," Larius said quietly. "We just haven't used everything we have yet." He picked up his phone and called Hollison. Hollison picked up on the second ring. It was after 10 at night, but she answered like it was 9 in the morning. Alert, immediate, already listening. Larius stood in the hallway outside the darkened living room where Darius hadn't moved from his chair, and he kept his voice low. "We're done playing defense," he said. A pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. The kind that meant she was weighing something she had already thought through. "Good," she said. "Because I've been waiting for this call. I need you both to trust me completely for what comes next. Don't ask me for details tonight. I need 24 hours to confirm everything is in place. Can you give me that?" "Yes," Larius said. "Get some sleep," she said. "Both of you." He went back to the living room. Darius was still in the chair, still in the dark. Larius turned on the small lamp on the side table. Low light, enough to see by. "She's been building something," Larius said. "She needs a day." Darius looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded and went upstairs. Larius found him the next morning at the kitchen table. Darius was sitting with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, staring at the middle distance. The coffee had gone completely cold. He hadn't touched it. He looked like a man who had been awake for most of the night and had made peace with that somewhere around 4 in the morning. Larius sat across from him without a word and poured his own coffee. They sat together in the early quiet. The refrigerator hummed. A bird worked at something outside the kitchen window. The morning was soft and ordinary and indifferent to everything happening inside this house. Ruth came downstairs 20 minutes later. She was dressed, hair done, moving with the purposeful ease of a woman who had risen early every day of her adult life, regardless of what the previous day had cost her. She read the table in one glance. The cold coffee, her son's faces, the particular quality of the silence, and she didn't reach for the coffee pot. She pulled out a chair and sat between them. She looked at Darius first. "Say it," she said. "Whatever is sitting in your chest, say it out loud. It's smaller once it's out." Darius looked at his mother. Then he looked at his hands around the cold mug. "I keep thinking about Bernard Orkin," he said. "About Samuel Pekes. About Elena Westby in the July heat with a damaged heart." He paused. "We did everything right. We built the evidence. We got the national coverage. We got a federal investigation opened." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, a fracture line running deep. And then one man made a phone call, and a 22-year senator went quiet, and the whole thing just stopped. Like it was nothing. Like we were nothing. Ruth didn't rush to fill the silence. "Your father said those exact words," she said. "In this kitchen. 1987. Both brothers looked at her. "He sat right where Larius is sitting," she continued. "After the third lawyer told him there was nothing to be done. He said, 'They always win. That's what the whole thing is built for.'" She placed her hands flat on the table. And he was right. Because he was fighting completely alone. He had no documentation. No federal officer in his corner. No recorded evidence. No other men willing to come forward. She looked at Darius. What he had was his word against Beaumont County's machinery. And that is a fight no single man wins. "We have documentation," Larius said quietly. "You have documentation," Ruth said. "You have security footage that has been preserved under federal law. You have 3 living veterans who have signed their names to what was done to them. You have a JAG officer with Pentagon clearance who has been building something she hasn't told you about yet." She looked at both sons. "Your father had none of that. Not one piece of it." Darius stared at the table. "None of that stopped Belvin from making a phone call," he said. "No," Ruth said evenly. "It didn't. But it means his phone call left fingerprints this time. And fingerprints are evidence." She reached across and put her hand over Darius's. "The difference between your father's fight and yours is not that the enemy is weaker. It's that you are not alone." The kitchen went quiet again. But it was a different quiet than before. Not the flat, sealed quiet of a closed door, but the still quiet of a room where something has shifted. Darius finally picked up his coffee mug. looked at the cold contents. "Set it aside." "Hollison needs one more day," Larius said. Darius nodded. "Then we wait one more day." Ruth stood, went to the coffee pot, and poured Darius a fresh cup without being asked. The call came the following morning at 8 o'clock exactly. Larius and Darius were already at the table. Ruth had made coffee and left a plate of biscuits between them before quietly disappearing to her garden, giving her sons the kitchen without making a point of it. The morning light came through the window at a low angle. Larius had his notepad open. Darius had slept. Actually slept, which showed in his face. Hollison appeared on the screen in full uniform, sitting straight, her desk behind her covered in organized files and marked folders stacked in deliberate rows. She looked like a woman who had been preparing for a presentation for weeks and was finally ready to give it. "Good morning," she said. "Pay attention." She opened the first folder. While everyone, the media, Belvin's people, Peters's attorneys, has been watching the DOJ civilian track, I have been building something else entirely. She looked directly into the camera. Something that exists in a completely different jurisdiction. Something Senator Harold Belvin III has absolutely no reach into. Larius's pen was already moving. 6 days after you first called me, Hollison said, I filed a formal complaint with the Inspector General of the Department of Defense. She let that land before continuing. The IG operates completely outside civilian political structures. It answers to the Department of Defense and, ultimately, to Congress as a whole. Not to any individual senator. Not to any committee Belvin sits on. Not to any channel he has spent 22 years cultivating. Her voice was precise and unhurried, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this and didn't need to rush it. The complaint does not target Peters directly. It targets something more specific and more federal. The pressure on our assignments, Larius said. Exactly. Hollison nodded. When unnamed congressional offices applied pressure regarding your future military assignments, attempting to use your service careers as leverage to silence you, that crossed a line that has nothing to do with Beaumont County and everything to do with federal law. Applying political interference to the military careers of active or recently discharged service members constitutes obstruction of military personnel. It is a federal offense. She paused. And Senator Belvin cannot call this investigation away, because he is not a bystander to it. He is its subject. Darius sat forward slowly. He tried to use our uniforms against us, Darius said. He tried to use your futures against you, Hollison said. And he left a trail doing it. She opened a second folder. Congressional pressure of that nature doesn't happen without communication. Emails, phone records, staffers who made calls on his behalf. The IG has subpoena authority that operates independently of anything Belvin can influence. Once that machinery starts moving, it doesn't stop because a senator makes a phone call. The phone call is the evidence. Larius wrote something on his notepad and underlined it twice. There's more, Hollison said. She pulled a third folder to the front. I've spent the last 3 weeks in contact with Bernard Orkin, Samuel Peaks, and Elena Westby. She said each name with deliberate weight. Bernard has signed a sworn affidavit, 12 pages, fully documented, detailing every element of his stop, his detainment, and the destruction of his business. She opened the next page. Samuel Peaks has provided complete detention records from his 11 days in Beaumont County lockup, along with the court transcript from his arraignment, including the judge's exact language when the charge was dismissed. And Elena? Darius asked. His voice was careful. Hollison looked at him directly. Elena Westby is 74 years old, has permanent cardiac damage, and takes nitroglycerin tablets everywhere he goes. She paused. He called me himself. He said, And I'm quoting him exactly. "I didn't survive 2 tours in Vietnam to stay quiet about this." Another pause. He has agreed to testify in person. The kitchen was absolutely still. "This is no longer the story of one afternoon at a gas station," Hollison said quietly. "It is a decade of documented, deliberate targeting of black veterans by a protected law enforcement official and the congressional machinery that kept him protected. We have security footage, military incident reports, 3 living witnesses with signed documentation, and a federal complaint that Senator Belvin cannot touch." She closed the folder. "The case is built. All of it. It has been built since the beginning." Darius exhaled, long and slow, like pressure releasing from something that had been sealed for too long. "How long have you been building this?" he asked. Hollison didn't hesitate. "Not for a single second." "Since the day you first called me," she said. Larius looked at his brother across the kitchen table. Darius looked back at him. The morning light sat between them, warm and steady. For the first time in weeks, both men smiled. The first subpoena arrived on a Thursday. Not at Peters's office. Not at the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department. Not at any address in Beaumont County at all. It arrived at the Washington offices of Senator Harold Belvin III. Hollison called Larius at 7 in the morning to tell him, and for the first time since this began, her voice carried something underneath the precision. Not excitement exactly, but the quiet, controlled satisfaction of a person watching something they built begin to work. "The IG doesn't telegraph," she said. "It doesn't announce. It doesn't hold press conferences. It just moves. And when it moves fast." By Friday morning, 3 more subpoenas had gone out. To 2 senior members of Belvin's staff, and to a liaison in the congressional office that had applied pressure on the brothers' military assignments. Federal investigators had already pulled 2 years of communication records, phone logs, emails, internal memos routed between Belvin's office and Beaumont County, going back further than anyone had publicly discussed. The senator's attorneys released a statement Friday afternoon, calling the investigation politically motivated and a misuse of federal resources. It was the statement of a man who had run out of phone calls to make. By the following Monday, a closed-door Senate Ethics Committee hearing had been convened. Not requested, not scheduled through the usual procedural channels, but called with the kind of institutional urgency that told everyone in Washington that what was inside those sealed rooms was not routine. The hearing covered Belvin's involvement not just in the Clover case, but in the suppression of all 3 prior DOJ investigations into Peters's department over the previous decade. 10 years of protected corruption laid out in a federal hearing room, away from cameras, but not away from consequences. Larius and Darius learned the details through Hollison in pieces. She called when she had confirmed information, said nothing when she didn't, and never speculated. They sat at Ruth's kitchen table for most of that week and let it move. Then Carl Mencher made a decision. Hollison confirmed it on Wednesday. Mencher had retained his own attorney, separate from Peters, separate from the county's legal representation, completely separate from anything Belvin's people could reach. He had walked into a federal building with that attorney and offered full cooperation with the IG investigation in exchange for reduced charges on his own federal exposure. His testimony was 3 hours long. Hollison described it in one word: devastating. Mencher had been present for every element of the Clover stop: the initial call, the deliberate framing of the report, the choreography of the response. He had been present, in various capacities, during the stops involving Bernard Orkin and Samuel Peaks. He knew about Elena Westby. He knew about the communications between Peters's department and Belvin's office. He knew exactly which calls had been made to pause the DOJ investigation and approximately when they had been made. He had known all of it, And now it was in a federal record. Mencher understood the math, Hollison told them. The IG investigation wasn't going to leave him standing. He chose to be a witness instead of a defendant. That same week, Peters's civil lawsuit against Larius and Darius went before a federal judge for a preliminary review. The proceeding lasted less than 2 hours. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had been on the federal bench for 19 years, read the complaint in full before she said anything. Then she said a great deal. She called the lawsuit a transparent and bad faith attempt to weaponize civil legal process against individuals engaged in constitutionally protected speech. She dismissed the complaint entirely. She went further, formally sanctioning Peters for abuse of legal process, entering the sanction into his federal record, and ordering him to pay Larius and Darius's full legal fees. Every dollar. Within 48 hours of Belvin's subpoena becoming public knowledge, the Department of Justice quietly issued a revised notice. The investigation into Beaumont County Sheriff's Department was resuming immediately. The jurisdictional questions had been resolved. The federal nexus was, it turned out, not insufficient at all. The questions had never been real. Everyone had known that. Now the record reflected it. On Friday evening, Senator Harold Belvin III released a brief written statement through his press office. It was 4 sentences long. It stated that after careful reflection and consultation with his family, he had decided not to seek re-election at the conclusion of his current term. It cited personal reasons. It thanked the people of Georgia for their trust. It did not mention the IG investigation. It did not mention the Ethics Committee hearing. It did not mention Beaumont County, or Denver Peters, or a gas station on Route 9, or 2 men face down in cuffs on a hot afternoon. It didn't need to. Nobody in Beaumont County believed a word of it, and nobody pretended to. The indictment came down on a Monday morning in October. 3 federal civil rights charges against Sheriff Denver Peters of Beaumont County, Georgia. 1 count for Bernard Orkin. 1 count for Samuel Peaks. 1 count for Eleanor Westby. The Clover incident named as the triggering event of record. The moment the pattern became undeniable. The thread that, when pulled, unraveled everything. Larius and Darius were not in Beaumont when it happened. They heard it from Hollison at 6 in the morning, her voice carrying that same controlled steadiness it had carried through every call since the beginning. But underneath it now, something warmer. Something that had been waiting a long time to be felt. They watched it on television. Ruth sat between them on the couch, the same way she had sat between them the night the Beaumont news broadcast tried to bury the story. Same couch. Same living room. Different morning entirely. The footage showed Peters walking out of the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department between 2 federal marshals. No cruiser, no hat, no deputies flanking him like a performance of authority. Just a man in a gray suit walking out of the building he had run like a private kingdom for 22 years, blinking in the October light, looking at nothing in particular. He looked small. That was the thing that struck Larius most. Not with satisfaction, not with triumph, just with the plain, factual recognition of what had always been true. Without the badge, without the 30 units, without the senator's phone number and the county's name on his side, Denver Peters was just a small man who had spent his entire life making other people smaller. Ruth watched the screen without speaking. Her hands were folded in her lap. When the footage ended, she reached over and turned the television off herself, quietly, deliberately, like closing a book she had finally finished. Elena Westby was in the courtroom gallery for the indictment hearing. Hollison had called him personally. He had driven himself, 2 hours from Beaumont County alone, in a truck he'd been driving since 2003. He was 74 years old, moved slowly, and carried his nitroglycerin tablets in the breast pocket of the same jacket he had worn to his son's college graduation. Pinned to the lapel were his Vietnam service ribbons, worn not as a statement, but as a simple fact about who he was and what he had survived. He sat in the second row and watched the proceeding with the patient, unreadable stillness of a man who had learned long ago how to wait for things that mattered. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence in that room said everything that needed to be said. 6 weeks later, the Senate Ethics Committee published its full findings on Senator Harold Belvin III. The document was 47 pages. It detailed 10 years of deliberate interference with federal investigations, documented communication between his office and Peters's department, and the specific mechanism by which 3 separate DOJ inquiries had been quietly killed in committee. The findings were entered into the permanent congressional record. His family's name was on the county. It would stay there. Geography didn't change, but the name meant something different now. It carried something it hadn't carried before, and everyone who said it knew it. The Veterans Advocacy Summit in Washington was held on the first Friday of November. Larius and Darius arrived in full Navy dress whites, every decoration in its correct position, every ribbon earned in places most people would never know about. They stood in the hallway outside the main hall and straightened each other's uniforms the way they had done before. Formal occasions their entire careers, neither of them speaking, operating from the same wordless understanding they had shared their whole lives. Ruth spoke last. She walked to that podium in a burgundy dress she had bought for the occasion, stood at the microphone, and looked out at the room. Veterans, advocates, journalists, congressional staffers, 3 men named Bernard Orkin, Samuel Peaks, and Elena Westby, sitting in the front row. She told them about Jordan Clover, about 1987, about 3 days in a county cell and a carpentry business that never recovered, and a man whose spirit bent under something it should never have been asked to carry. She told them about 35 years of teaching black children in Beaumont County, while watching the machinery of that county grind through their fathers and brothers and sons. She told them about a green front door and 2 boys she had built into something no one could easily destroy. She told them what it cost, and what it was worth. The room rose before she finished her last sentence. All of it. Standing. Without coordination. Without signal. Just people rising because something true had been said in their presence, and their bodies responded before their minds could. Darius found Larius near the back of the hall when it was over. Ruth was still at the front, receiving people, dignified, unhurried, completely herself. Both brothers stood quietly for a moment, watching her. "We made it home," Darius said softly. "It meant more than one thing. It always did. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.